Raiden stood in the aftermath, his blade still humming with residual charge. The facility around him was silent now, the kind of silence that follows violence, heavy and absolute. Bodies lay scattered across steel grating, their blood pooling in geometric patterns beneath flickering emergency lights. These weren't soldiers. They were traffickers, merchants of forbidden technology who had pushed too far into territories that governments pretended didn't exist. He had hunted them for 3 weeks across 2 continents. The trail had led here, to this abandoned research complex buried in the Carpathian Mountains, where the snow fell so thick it erased footprints within minutes. They had been experimenting with something. The intercepted transmissions spoke of energy signatures that defied conventional physics, of doorways that opened into places without coordinates. Raiden walked through the corridors, his footsteps precise and measured. His enhanced senses registered everything: the ozone smell of overloaded capacitors, the faint electromagnetic distortions emanating from the central chamber ahead, the barely perceptible vibration in the air that suggested something was still active. He had saved the world more times than he cared to count. Each victory had taught him the same bitter lesson: there was always another threat, always another shadow waiting beyond the light. The central chamber was vast, cathedral-like in its dimensions. At its heart, suspended within a framework of cables and coolant lines, hung a sphere of writhing energy. It pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist, hues that made his optical implants struggle to process the input. The technicians had fled or died. Only the machines remained, their screens displaying data streams in languages Raiden didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to shift and change even as he watched them. He approached cautiously, his tactical awareness screaming warnings his rational mind couldn't quite articulate. This wasn't nuclear. It wasn't biological. It was something older, something that predated the categories humanity had invented to understand danger. The sphere convulsed.
Realititore.
It wasn't an explosion, it was an unfolding, a blooming of impossible geometry that spread outward like a wound in the fabric of space itself. Raiden's combat reflexes kicked in instantly, but there was nothing to cut, nothing to evade. The breach expanded with terrifying speed, and he felt the pull, not gravity, but something that reached past his body and seized the very concept of his existence. He was lifted, torn from the floor as if he weighed nothing. The chamber collapsed inward, walls and ceiling folding toward the rift with the grinding shriek of tortured metal. Raiden reached for anything, found nothing. The last thing he saw of his world was the snow outside the windows, peaceful and indifferent, before the breach swallowed him whole. The transition was agony without pain, a violation of every sense he possessed. His enhanced nervous system, built to process combat data at superhuman speeds, was overwhelmed by input that had no translation. He tumbled through spaces between spaces, through colors that had textures and sounds that had weight. Voices pressed against his mind, speaking in cadences that bypassed language and went straight to primal terror. But Raiden had been broken before. He had been unmade and remade, stripped down to his essential will and rebuilt from trauma and titanium. His hand found the hilt of his blade still there. Still real, and he gripped it with the focused intensity that had carried him through every hell he'd ever known. The pressure increased. Reality became fluid. He saw faces in the chaos, screaming, laughing, weeping, hungry. They reached for him with hands that multiplied and merged, trying to peel back his thoughts like layers of skin. He felt the weight of despair pressing down, an ocean of accumulated suffering trying to drown him. He didn't pray. He didn't plead. He simply refused. His blade ignited, its high-frequency vibrations cutting through matter at the molecular level. But here, in this place without physics, it cut through something else, through the pressure itself, through the grasping unreality. The entities recoiled, confused by resistance they hadn't expected. Raiden fell, or rose, or moved in directions that had no names. Time lost meaning. He might have been adrift for seconds or centuries, but through it all, he maintained the only thing that had ever truly been his, the choice to keep fighting. When the light finally came, it was harsh and red, like staring into a wound. The Imperium did not welcome visitors. It devoured them, absorbed them, turned their fears and hopes into fuel for horrors beyond comprehension. But Raiden was not a visitor, he was an intrusion, a fragment of ordered reality thrust into absolute chaos. He floated in an ocean of screaming colors. There was no up or down, no ground beneath his feet, only the endless churning void where thought and matter blurred into one. Shapes coalesced around him, things with too many eyes, mouths that opened in dimensions his mind refused to process, limbs that bent through angles geometry couldn't contain. They circled him like sharks scenting blood. The whispers came first. Not words, but feelings injected directly into his consciousness. They promised power if he would only kneel. They showed him visions of Rose, of everyone he'd failed to save, drowning in lakes of blood while he watched helplessly. They offered him the strength to prevent every future tragedy, if he would just surrender his will to theirs. Raiden had heard lies before. These were better crafted, more intimate, but lies nonetheless. A demon materialized fully, its form stabilizing into something almost coherent, a towering figure wreathed in brass and flame, wielding an axe that wept molten rage. It roared, and the sound carried the accumulated fury of 10,000 wars. The Imperium itself seemed to recoil from the creature's presence. Raiden moved. His blade traced a silver arc through unreality, and the impossible happened. The demon bled. Not blood, but essence, the fundamental substance of its existence spilling out in streamers of dissipating energy. The creature's roar became a shriek of genuine surprise. Raiden pressed the attack with surgical precision. Every movement was economy itself, no wasted motion, no excess expenditure of energy. He had been trained by the best killers humanity had ever produced, refined through countless battles into a weapon that thought and acted as one. His blade found weak points in armor that existed only conceptually, severed connections between the demon's will and its manifested form. The entity collapsed back into the raw stuff of chaos, its coherence shattered. Others came. They always did. A horror of flesh and despair reached for him with diseased talons, promising an end to struggle through eternal decay. Raiden dismembered it with 3 precise cuts, his enhanced reflexes operating faster than thought itself. A creature of impossible beauty tried to seduce him with visions of pleasure beyond mortal comprehension. He cut through its lies and its substance with equal indifference. The warp learned, adapted. The attacks became more coordinated, more intelligent. Entities worked in concert, trying to overwhelm him through sheer numbers and variety. But Raiden had fought armies before. He had carved through Metal Gears and military-industrial complexes, through cyborg soldiers and nanomachine-enhanced politicians. These creatures were strange, terrifying, and utterly alien, but they followed patterns. Everything that fought followed patterns. He studied them even as he destroyed them. The way the warp entities manifested seemed tied to emotion and belief. They were strongest when their victims were afraid, weakest when faced with absolute conviction. Raiden's conviction was simple: survive, adapt, overcome. It was a creed forged in 1,000 battles, tempered by betrayal and loss, and it burned in him with a purity that the warp could not corrupt. He was not a psyker. He had no connection to this realm of souls and madness. But his blade was real, his will was unbreakable, and somewhere in the intersection of those two facts, he found purchase even in this place without logic. Time passed differently here, or didn't pass at all. Raiden fought through an eternity compressed into moments, or moments stretched into ages. The demons kept coming, but their attacks grew more cautious. They had learned fear, these creatures born from fear itself. And in their vast, impossible palaces beyond the veil of sanity, the Chaos Gods turned their attention toward this anomaly. This warrior who killed without faith, who destroyed without worship, whose rage was cold and controlled rather than hot and devotional. He was a curiosity, a puzzle, a threat they did not yet understand. Khorne, the blood god, felt the echoes of each kill and found them wanting violence without glory, slaughter without exaltation. Sun Chi, the architect of fate, calculated 1,000 futures and found this warrior absent from the great games of destiny. Nurgle, the Plague Father, sensed a spirit that refused to accept decay even when flesh had long since been replaced by steel. Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, reached for this new sensation and found only discipline, pleasure denied in service of purpose. Raiden did not know he was being watched by gods. He only knew that the attacks had paused, that the Imperium around him had grown still in a way that felt more dangerous than the chaos. Then, reality reasserted itself with brutal suddenness. Gravity returned. Air rushed into lungs. Light became something that could be seen rather than felt. Raiden was falling through a sky of iron and ash. The world was dying in fire and faith. Raiden hit the ground in a crouch, his impact servos absorbing the force of a fall that would have killed any unaugmented human. Smoke filled his lungs, acrid, chemical, mixed with the copper-sweet stench of blood. His tactical systems came online immediately, scanning and categorizing the battlefield that stretched in every direction. The architecture was wrong. Massive Gothic structures of stone and steel rose around him, covered in symbols that looked like eagles and skulls merged into religious iconography. The technology was a bizarre fusion of advanced and primitive. He could see energy weapons and vacuum tubes, armored vehicles that looked like cathedrals on treads. And everywhere there was war. To his left, a line of soldiers in crude flak armor fired lasguns at a surging tide of enemies. The attackers were human in basic shape, only their flesh was twisted into obscene configurations. Their weapons fused to mutated limbs, and they chanted words that made reality shudder. To his right, massive furnaces belched toxic smoke into an already ruined sky, their fires still burning despite the assault. A forge world, his tactical database suggested. Industrial. Strategic. Currently being overrun. The soldiers' line broke. A champion emerged from the attacking horde, easily 3 meters tall, armored in plates that seemed grown rather than forged, wielding a sword that wept corrosive fluid. It cleaved through 3 guardsmen with a single sweep, laughing with voices that came from multiple throats. Raiden moved before conscious thought formed. He crossed 50 meters in seconds, his enhanced speed making him appear as a blur to normal human perception. The champion turned, sensing the threat, raising its blade to parry, but Raiden's sword was already past its guard. The high-frequency blade sheared through corrupted armor and diseased flesh, finding the bundle of organs that might have once been a heart. The champion fell, confusion frozen on its mutated faces. The horde faltered, shocked by the sudden death of their leader. Raiden didn't give them time to recover. He moved through their ranks like wind through wheat, each strike perfectly placed, each movement flowing into the next with the practiced efficiency of a master swordsman. He didn't waste energy on flourishes or displays of power. Every cut served a purpose: to disable, to kill, to create openings in the enemy formation. The cultists tried to surround him. He was always somewhere else. They tried to shoot him. His blade deflected their crude bullets and warped energy blasts with precise angles of interception. They tried to overwhelm him with numbers. He turned their density into a disadvantage, forcing them to stumble over their own dead. Within minutes, the assault on this section of the line had collapsed. The surviving cultists fled, their momentum broken by the sudden reversal. The guardsmen stared at Raiden with expressions that mixed awe, confusion, and barely concealed terror. An officer approached, his uniform marked with insignia Raiden didn't recognize. The man's face was young but aged by war, his eyes carrying the weight of watching too many soldiers die. He stopped 3 meters away, lasgun held ready but not quite aimed. What are you?" the officer asked in a language Raiden shouldn't have understood but somehow died as if the warp's touch had left him with unwanted gifts. "A soldier," Raiden replied simply. "No soldier moves like that. No man kills demons barehanded." The officer's voice trembled between hope and accusation. "Are you one of the Emperor's angels, a weapon from Mars?" Raiden looked at the bodies around him, then at the city burning in the distance. He could see more of the twisted cultists gathering, preparing for another assault. The industrial complex behind the guardsmen's position housed civilians. He could hear their terror even through reinforced walls. I'm not here for your emperor, Raiden said. But I won't stand by while people die. The officer's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on pragmatic desperation. The line is collapsing on every front. We've lost contact with 3/4 of the forge temples. The priests keep praying, but the enemy keeps coming. He gestured toward the distance where massive shapes move through the smoke. They're bringing something worse. We can't hold. Raiden's sensors confirmed it, large heat signatures, multiple contacts approaching fast. Whatever was coming would shatter what remained of the defenders. Then we don't hold, Raiden said. We strike. The officer blinked. We don't have the numbers for. You don't need numbers. You need precision. Raiden turned toward the approaching threat. Pull your people back to the civilian shelters. Create a defensive corridor. I'll buy you time. Alone, that's suicide. Raiden activated his blade, the high-frequency hum cutting through the battlefield's chaos. I've done suicide missions before, I'm still here. He ran toward the enemy before the officer could protest further, accelerating to speeds that left afterimages in the smoke. Behind him, he heard the officer shouting orders, the guardsmen scrambling to reposition. It wasn't much, but it was a chance, and Raiden had turned worse chances into victories before. The approaching horrors emerged from the smoke demon engines, fusion of machine and warp-spawn nightmare, their weapons already charging. Raiden counted 6, each the size of a small building, their forms shifting between mechanical and organic in ways that violated physics. He smiled grimly. In his world, he had carved through metal gears the size of cities. These would fall just the same. Victory brought complications Raiden hadn't anticipated. The Forge world survived. The civilian populations were evacuated through defensive corridors Raiden had carved with surgical violence. The Chaos assault crumbled when their momentum broke, their demon engines reduced to scrap by a warrior who treated God's gifts as engineering problems to be solved. But salvation without sanctification was heresy. The Inquisition arrived 3 days after the last cultist fell. Their ship descended from orbit like a black cathedral, its presence alone making the surviving guardsmen avert their eyes. The Inquisitor who emerged was a woman whose age was impossible to determine. Augmetics replaced half her face, and her eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had looked into the abyss and judged it wanting. I am Inquisitor Valorous, she announced, her voice amplified to fill the landing platform. I am here to investigate reports of unsanctioned demon-slaying and potential corruption. Raiden stood motionless as her retinue surrounded him, stormtroopers with weapons trained, psychers with wards active, servoskulls scanning every inch of his body. He had learned enough about this universe to know that cooperation was the fastest path through interrogation. The psychers probed his mind and found walls that shouldn't exist. Not psychic barriers, those they could break, but a fundamental absence, as if his soul existed in a frequency they couldn't access. They searched for warp taint and found only scars, memories of trauma that would have broken lesser men but had instead forged something harder than ceramite. He's clean, one psyker whispered, confusion evident in her voice. No corruption, no demonic pacts, no psychic potential at all. Impossible, Valera said flatly. No one kills warp entities without faith or corruption. No human possesses that speed, that strength, that precision without enhancement from the dark powers. Raiden met her gaze. I was enhanced by science, not sorcery. Built to fight wars, not worship gods. There is only one science, that which serves the Omnissiah, only one strength, that which flows from the Emperor's grace. Valeris circled him like a predator. You speak of godless power, which means you are either lying or something far worse. The Mechanicus delegation arrived while Valeris was still deliberating his fate. Tech priests in crimson robes, their bodies more machine than flesh, their mechadendrites twitching with barely contained curiosity. The lead magos approached Raiden with sensors extended, binary cants spilling from vocoder speakers. Fascinating, the magos said, switching to Gothic. Cybernetics of unknown pattern, neural interfacing beyond current Martian specifications. Molecular edge weaponry operating on principles our forge temples have not yet blessed. The tech priest's optical implants focused with audible clicking. "You are a holy relic of the Dark Age, yes? A STC fragment made flesh?" "I'm a soldier from another world," Raiden repeated. The Magos ignored him, already cataloging augmentics with the fervor of a priest discovering scripture. "The Omnissiah's gifts, preserved through temporal anomaly. You must come to Mars. Your design must be studied, replicated, sanctified. He will go nowhere until his soul is measured." Valeris interrupted. The Grey Knights arrived on the 7th day Space Marines in silver armor. Demon hunters whose existence was officially denied. They moved with the lethal grace of apex predators, and their psychic presence made even the Inquisitors step back. Their leader, a warrior whose armor bore seals Raiden couldn't read, studied him in silence for a full minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly calm. "You do not register to our witch site. You carry no stain of the warp, yet you have waded through its depths. You kill demons with a blade of pure edge, not blessed silver or sanctified iron." The Grey Knight tilted his head. "You are an anomaly. In my experience, anomalies are either miracles or threats." "Which do you think I am?" Raiden asked. "Both." The Grey Knight's helmet tilted toward the ruined battlefield. "You saved lives that our doctrine would have written off as acceptable losses. You fought without prayer, without faith, with only skill and will. That makes you either the most dangerous heretic we've encountered, or the most honest warrior in the Imperium." Raiden's hand never left his blade's hilt. "I'm not here to join your empire or your church. I'm here because I have nowhere else to be. But as long as I'm breathing, I won't stand by while people die." The tension crystallized. Inquisitor Valeris wanted him executed or bound. The Mechanicus wanted him dissected and catalogued. The Grey Knights wanted him tested or terminated. Raiden simply waited, calculating odds, planning escape routes, preparing for violence he hoped wouldn't come. It was the Grey Knight who broke the stalemate. There is war across 1,000 worlds. Darkness rises in places where even the Imperium's light grows dim. If you wish to fight, he gestured toward the smoke-stained horizon. There is no shortage of fighting. This is madness, Valeris protested. Allowing an unbound weapon to roam free is no different than what the Emperor does with us, the Grey Knight interrupted. We are weapons unbound by normal morality, pointed at threats beyond normal comprehension. He looked back at Raiden. The question is whether this weapon points himself or requires direction. Raiden understood the test being offered, freedom in exchange for service, but service defined by his own code, not their doctrine. Where is the fighting worst? He asked. The Grey Knight's helmet reflected the burning world, everywhere. Raiden's grip on his blade tightened. Then show me where to start. Chaos declared war on the anomaly. Across the warp, in realms where madness made architecture and screams became music, the dark powers plotted. This warrior who killed without worship, who walked through their domain untouched by corruption, who treated demons as mere enemies rather than divine horrors, he was an insult that could not be tolerated. They sent their champions. The first came on a world where the sky had turned to bleeding flesh and the ground writhed with teeth. A demon prince of Khorne, elevated from mortal champion to immortal destroyer, manifested in brass and rage. It had slaughtered entire space marine companies, broken fortress monasteries with its bare hands, drunk oceans of blood in the blood god's name. Raiden met it in the ruins of a cathedral where prayers had long since turned to screams. The demon prince roared its challenge, the sound fracturing stone and rupturing eardrums of anyone within 100 meters. It raised its axe the size of a battle tank and brought it down with enough force to shatter bulkheads. Raiden wasn't there when it landed. He was already moving, his enhanced speed turning him into a silver blur. The demon prince was fast inhumanly, impossibly fast. But Raiden was faster. His blade found the gaps in brass armor, the joints where even demon-forged metal had to bend. Each cut was perfect, precise, inflicting maximum damage with minimum exposure. The prince adapted, reading Raiden's patterns, predicting his movements. Its axe came within centimeters of Raiden's head, close enough that the wind of its passing disturbed his hair. The demon laughed, tasting victory. Raiden changed tactics mid-strike, flowing into a different combat form, abandoning the pattern the demon had learned. His blade pierced the prince's throat, found the core of demonic essence beneath the armor, and carved it open. The demon screamed not in pain, but in genuine surprise. It had not expected to die. Raiden didn't explain himself. He never did. He simply moved to the next fight. Tzeentch sent sorcerers next champions who could see the future, who wove fate like tapestry, who turned reality into playground. They crafted elaborate traps, impossible labyrinths of causality where every choice led to doom. Raiden ignored their games. When faced with 10,000 possible futures, he chose the 11th option they hadn't calculated. Overwhelming, unrelenting violence applied faster than their precognition could process. Sorcerers who saw destiny itself were reduced to burning corpses before their visions could update. Nurgle's plagues couldn't touch a man who was more machine than flesh. His biological components were minimal, isolated, protected by nanofilters and redundant systems. Where plague marines spread contagion that melted ceramite, Raiden walked through clouds of infection untouched, his blade separating diseased champions from their immortality. Slaanesh's seductions found no purchase on a mind already scarred beyond the reach of pleasure or pain. Raiden had been broken and rebuilt too many times to be tempted by promises of sensation. The demonettes who had driven space marines to madness with whispered ecstasies found themselves facing a warrior who treated their attempts at corruption as background noise. The warbands learned to fear a pattern. Wherever chaos gained a foothold, wherever demonic incursion seemed unstoppable, a silver blade would appear. The warrior never announced himself, never sought glory, never demanded recognition. He simply identified the command structure, decapitated it with surgical precision, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. On Tertius 9, Raiden infiltrated a Black Legion staging ground and assassinated 3 Chaos Lords in a single night, collapsing an invasion force that had taken decades to assemble. On Gehenna Tertius, he disrupted a summoning ritual by killing the lead sorcerer mid-incantation, causing a backlash that vaporized the entire cult. On worlds whose names had been stricken from Imperial records, he carved through chaos forces that had stood undefeated for centuries. The Chaos Champions began to question their gods' gifts. If immortality could be cut, if divine blessing could be outmaneuvered, if power granted by the dark gods could be defeated by simple skill and speed, what was the point of damnation? Doubt spread like infection through the warp's servants. Doubt was poison to beings sustained by absolute conviction. Khorne roared his fury across 8 dimensions, demanding this insult be crushed. But every champion sent returned to the warp as dissipating essence, their power scattered, their names forgotten. Tzeentch calculated and recalculated, trying to weave this anomaly into his great game. But every plot dissolved against the simple, brutal efficiency of a warrior who didn't play. Raiden adapted to every enemy faster than they adapted to him. He learned the telltale shimmer of demonic materialization, the psychic pressure that preceded warp-spawned assaults, the patterns of chaos tactics across 100 battlefields. His combat database grew with every engagement, his response time shortened, his precision increased. He discovered that demons, for all their otherworldly power, were predictable. They were slaves to their nature's Khorne's servants, always chose frontal assault. Tzeentch's favored elaborate schemes, Nurgle's endured rather than evaded, Slaanesh's overextended in pursuit of excess. Understanding their nature meant exploiting it. On a dying hive world, Raiden faced a demon horde that had broken 3 Imperial Guard regiments. He didn't meet them head-on. Instead, he identified the summoning anchors, the ritual sites binding the demons to reality, and destroyed them in rapid succession. The demon army didn't die gloriously. It simply ceased to exist, banished mid-charge, their rage echoing into the warp unfulfilled. Chaos learned a lesson it had never been taught before. Power meant nothing without the skill to apply it. Divine favor was worthless against an enemy who treated gods as obstacles rather than destinies. The warrior didn't pray for victory. He simply took it, one precise cut at a time. And in the warp's depths, The Chaos Gods felt something they had not experienced in millennia, not fear exactly, but a creeping awareness that perhaps, just perhaps, there existed things in the universe that their power could not touch, their corruption could not claim, their will could not break. A blade that cut without faith, a warrior who killed without worship, a soul that passed through their realm and emerged untainted. Chaos had claimed countless billions, but this one, this single anomaly, remained beyond their grasp. And that was unacceptable. The Black Templars had been hunting chaos for 10,000 years. They knew war in all its forms, had fought on every battlefield the Imperium could name. They did not expect to find a human outpacing their assault. The confrontation began on Talisar's Reach, where Raiden had just collapsed a chaos stronghold. The Space Marines arrived to find the fortress already burning, its defenders already dead, and a single figure standing in the courtyard surrounded by corpses that bore the marks of impossibly precise swordsmanship. Castellan Godric, leading the crusade, stepped forward in power armor that had been blessed in 1,000 battles. Even without his helmet, his face was a sculpture of controlled fury, scarred by centuries of war. "Identify yourself," Godric commanded, his voice amplified by Vox systems into a thunderous declaration. Raiden turned slowly, his blade still active, still ready. "Just passing through. No mortal passes through demon fortresses alone." Godric's hand moved to his chainsword. "You are either blessed by the Emperor beyond measure, or you are tainted beyond redemption. We will determine which." The other Black Templars spread out, their bolters trained on Raiden with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had fought together for decades. These were not ordinary humans. These were the Emperor's angels of death, transhuman warriors whose strength could shatter steel, whose reflexes could track bolter rounds, whose faith was armor no blade could pierce. "I don't want to fight you," Raiden said simply. "Then kneel, submit to examination, prove your purity." Raiden's stance shifted minutely, weight redistributing, center of gravity lowering. The Black Templars recognized a combat posture when they saw one. Godric's chainsword roared to life. So be it. He charged with the speed of a freight train, closing 20 meters in 2 seconds. His chainsword descended in an arc that would have bisected any normal human. Raiden sidestepped, his movement so fluid it seemed effortless, and his blade traced a silver line across Godric's power armor. Ceramite spot. The armor held barely. A centimeter deeper and the cut would have found flesh. Godric spun, shocked by the speed. He was a space marine, enhanced beyond human limits, wearing armor that made him faster and stronger still. This mortal shouldn't have been able to evade, let alone counterattack. The other Templars opened fire. Bolter rounds, mass-reactive explosive shells filled the air between them and their target. Raiden moved through the storm of fire like water through rocks, his enhanced reflexes and predictive algorithms calculating trajectories faster than human thought. His blade deflected rounds that came too close, the high-frequency edge detonating them prematurely. A Terminator-armored veteran tried to flank, moving with the inexorable mass of a walking tank. Raiden went low, sliding under the swing of a power fist, his blade finding the joint at the warrior's knee. The armor held, but the impact staggered the Space Marine, something that shouldn't have been possible. Godric attacked again, this time supported by 2 battle brothers. Their coordination was flawless, centuries of combat experience orchestrating a killing pattern that left no escape. Raiden didn't escape. He attacked into the center of their formation, his speed turning defense into offense, his blade finding the microsecond gaps between their coordinated strikes. For 30 seconds, the courtyard became a whirlwind of blade and bolter, chainsword and calculated violence. Neither side gave ground. Neither side could gain advantage. Then Godric raised his fist, and the Black Templars stopped. The Castellan was breathing hard, not from exhaustion, but from something like exhilaration. His armor bore dozens of scoring marks where Raiden's blade had tested its integrity. In 300 years of warfare, few enemies had marked him so thoroughly without dying. "You fight like us," Godric said, deactivating his chainsword. "Not our technique, not our strength, but the conviction. the absolute commitment to the kill. He studied Raiden with new understanding. You are a weapon that thinks it's still human. Raiden lowered his blade slightly. I'm human enough to know when killing is necessary and when it's just wasteful. Pragmatism. Godric almost smiled. The Ultramarines would approve. We prefer faith. Faith in what? An emperor who demands worship, gods who feed on suffering. Raiden gestured to the burning fortress. I've seen what faith creates. I'll take skill and will over divine favor any day. The Black Templars exchanged glances, communicating through helmet systems. Several made the sign of the Aquila, either blessing or ward against potential heresy. Godric approached closer, his massive frame towering over Raiden. You are an anomaly, a weapon without master, a warrior without chapter. In any other circumstance, we would be obligated to kill you as uncontrolled ordnance. He paused. But we have fought alongside the Death Watch. We understand that sometimes the Emperor provides tools that do not fit standard doctrine. I'm not a tool. No, Godric agreed. You're a soldier, perhaps the most honest soldier in this entire damned galaxy. He extended his gauntleted hand. There is a world burning 3 systems from here. Chaos grows strong, and the Imperial defenders weaken. We ride to war at dawn. Raiden looked at the offered hand, understanding the unspoken offer. Not alliance space marines didn't form alliances with mortals. But recognition. Warrior to war. One killer acknowledging another's skill. He clasped the gauntlet. His hand was tiny in the space marine's grip, but his handshake was firm. I'll find my own way there, Raiden said. But I'll be there. Godric nodded. Then we shall see if your skill matches your confidence, little blade. The Black Templars departed, their thunderhawks ascending into the smoke-darkened sky. But the word spread through their chapter, a mortal who fought like a space marine, who bore no corruption, whose skill was worthy of respect. It was not quite approval, but it was no longer automatic condemnation. In the galaxy of endless war, that was as close to peace as warriors ever came. The world was called Meridian's Hope. It would soon be called nothing at all. Raiden arrived in response to distress signals, chaos incursions, demonic manifestations, the usual litany of horrors that plagued the Imperium's border worlds. He spent 2 weeks carving through cultist cells, collapsing summoning rituals, eliminating chaos champions before they could solidify their holds on reality. The planet's population fought beside him. Not soldiers, farmers, factory workers, teachers who took up auto guns because their homes were under threat. They weren't skilled, but they were determined. Raiden taught them what he could: how to hold a firing line, where to aim to stop chaos mutants, when to retreat, and when to hold ground. Slowly, the tide turned. The chaos assault fractured. The warp rifts began to close. Meridian's Hope began to live up to its name. That's when the Inquisition's fleet arrived. Raiden stood on the walls of the capital city, watching the vessels enter orbit. There were no troop transports, no support craft, only battleships with lances that could burn continents. Inquisitor Lord Kravax's message was broadcast across every Vox system on the planet. Meridian's Hope has been deemed compromised beyond redemption. The taint of chaos cannot be cleansed by faith alone, by the authority vested in me by the God Emperor of mankind. I declare Exterminatus. All Imperial servants are to evacuate within 12 hours. May the Emperor have mercy on your souls, for we have none. The broadcast ended. Panic erupted in the streets below. Raiden accessed Imperial channels, difficult, but not impossible for someone with his electronic warfare capabilities. He reviewed the Inquisition's assessment. 3 chaos incursions over 6 months. Demonic manifestations confirmed. Population potentially corrupted beyond recovery. The assessment was outdated. Filed before Raiden's intervention. Before the rituals were broken, before the chaos forces were shattered. No one had bothered to update it. Raiden contacted the Inquisitorial flagship directly, cutting through their secure Vox channels with brute force decryption. This is the warrior designated Raiden. Meridian's Hope is secure. Chaos has been purged. Delay the Exterminatus, send verification teams. The response came from Kravix himself, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had made 10,000 life-or-death decisions. The order is given. The planet is tainted. 1,000,000 lives are acceptable sacrifice to ensure chaos gains no foothold. 1,000,000 lives you haven't verified need to die. I do not require verification. I require obedience. Kravix's tone hardened. Evacuate or burn with them, anomaly. Your previous service buys you 12 hours, nothing more. The channel closed. Raiden stood motionless for 3 seconds, running calculations, assessing options. He couldn't fight an entire inquisitorial fleet. His skills meant nothing against orbital bombardment. If he stayed, he would die alongside everyone else, a pointless sacrifice. But there was another option. Raiden descended into the city, moving through crowds already streaming toward spaceports that couldn't possibly accommodate them all. He found the planetary governor, an elderly woman who had held her position through competence rather than birthright, rare in the Imperium. How fast can you organize an evacuation? Raiden asked. 12 hours? We'd be lucky to save 10%. Her voice was steady despite the circumstances. Most of my people don't even have access to transportation. The spaceports are already overwhelmed. What if you had 24 hours and clear corridors to the ports? Hope flickered in her eyes. Maybe 50%, if we conscript every cargo hauler, every transport. Then start organizing. I'll buy you time. How? You can't fight a fleet. No, Raiden agreed. But I can make them hesitate. He returned to the planet's main communications array, one of the few pieces of technology that approached what he considered standard. Within an hour, he had compiled a complete tactical assessment of Meridian's hope. Location of every eliminated chaos stronghold, casualty reports, purification confirmations, psychic readings from the planet's sanctioned psychers showing warp contamination dropping to baseline levels. He transmitted the data package to every vessel in the inquisitorial fleet, to every Mechanicus station within 3 systems, to every administratum office that might have jurisdiction. He made the planet's salvation public record, impossible to ignore. Then he broadcast a message on open channels. Inquisitor Lord Kravix is about to murder 1,000,000 loyal Imperial citizens based on outdated intelligence. The planet is clean. The verification is attached. Any commander who proceeds with Exterminatus is not serving the Emperor. They're committing genocide out of bureaucratic. The response was immediate and furious. Kravix demanded Raiden's location, threatened prosecution for heresy and obstruction. But other voices joined the argument, Mechanicus priests who reviewed the data and confirmed its accuracy. Junior inquisitors who questioned the rush to judgment, even guard commanders who noted that the planet's defenders had fought loyally and effectively. The 12-hour countdown paused. Not canceled, just paused. Raiden used the delay to do what he did best. He moved through the city in a blur of organized chaos, directing evacuation flows, clearing blocked routes, organizing civilian defenders into efficient rescue teams. Where panicked crowds threatened to become stampedes, his presence calm, confident, unbreakable became a stabilizing force. He couldn't save everyone. The mathematics were brutal: too many people, too few ships, too little time. But he could maximize the numbers, optimize every second, turn chaos into coordinated motion. When the inquisitorial verification teams finally landed 20 hours after the initial countdown, they found Raiden directing the final evacuation waves. The team spread across the planet, scanning for warp taint, interviewing survivors, examining the sites of Raiden's battles. Their report was unambiguous. Meridian's hope was clean. Chaos had been purged. The population showed no corruption beyond what could be expected from brief exposure, easily managed by standard cleansing protocols. Inquisitor Lord Kravix read the report in silence. Then he ordered the fleet to stand down. No apology was issued. No gratitude was expressed. The inquisitorial fleet simply departed, moving on to the next potential threat. Raiden watched them go from the now empty communications tower. Around him, the city was half deserted, its population cut in half by evacuation. But half remained. Half lived who would have burned. The planetary governor found him there as the sun set.
You saved us, she said simply.
I delayed them, Raiden corrected. You saved yourselves by being worth saving. What will you do now? Raiden looked toward the stars, toward the endless wars that raged across the galaxy.
Find the next fight, stop the next atrocity. He started toward his transport. Try to remember why any of this matters.
There were places in the galaxy where reality wore thin, where the warp pressed so close to the material realm that the boundary became negotiable. These were the wounds through which chaos poured its corruption, the gates that should never have been opened. Raiden began hunting them deliberately. If he couldn't return to his world, if he was trapped in this universe of endless war and religious madness, then he would at least make his presence count. The chaos gods wanted him dead or corrupted.
He decided to make them regret the attention.
The first raid targeted a demon world at the edge of the Eye of Terror, a place where the warp had fully consumed reality, where the laws of physics were suggestions at best.
Imperial forces avoided these worlds, wrote them off as lost.
They couldn't be cleansed, only contained. Raiden didn't intend to cleanse it. He intended to hurt the things that ruled it. He infiltrated through a barely stable warp rift, riding the edge of a demonic incursion backward into its source. The transition was agony, his enhanced body screaming protests as it crossed from ordered reality into spaces where thought became substance. But pain was information, and information was tactical advantage. The demon world was a nightmare rendered in brass and blood. Fortresses of fused bone rose into skies that bled eternal red. Rivers of molten rage flowed through valleys carved by screaming. And everywhere, demons, thousands, millions, an infinite army of the blood gods chosen. Raiden moved through their realm like a ghost. His presence didn't register to the demon's warp sense because he had none. To beings that perceived reality through the lens of emotion and faith, he was functionally invisible, a gap in their awareness, a blind spot in the Imperium's all-seeing eye. He studied their strongholds, mapped their patterns, identified the nexus points where demon princes held court, and directed armies into the material realm. Then he struck. The first demon prince died before realizing it was under attack. Raiden's blade opened its throat, tore what passed for a throat, severing the concentration that held its manifested form together. The creature exploded back into raw warp stuff, its power scattered, its armies suddenly leaderless. Raiden was already moving to the next target. Over the course of 3 days or 3 centuries, time was meaningless. Here he assassinated 17 demon princes, collapsed 12 summoning fortresses, and disrupted ritual preparations that had taken millennia to arrange. He couldn't destroy the demon world, couldn't kill every horror that dwelled there. But he could create chaos within chaos itself. The blood god's attention turned fully upon him. A voice like grinding continents roared across dimensions. "Warrior, face me." Raiden found himself standing in an arena of brass and skulls, the size of a continent, surrounded by an audience of screaming demons. Before him materialized an avatar, not the blood god himself, that would have shattered reality, but a fragment of his will given terrible form. It towered 50 meters high, wielded an axe that dripped liquid war, and radiated fury that made stars burn. "You dare profane my realm with your godless violence?" the avatar thundered. "You kill in my domain without offering worship. You are insult given flesh." Raiden looked up at the towering impossibility. In his world he had fought Metal Gear's walking nuclear weapons piloted by madmen. He had carved through Senator Armstrong, a man who had made himself invincible through nanomachines and ideology. He had faced the impossible before. "I've fought worse," Raiden said, and attacked. The battle defied description. Raiden moved at speeds that should have torn him apart, his blades striking points of conceptual weakness in a being made of pure warfare. The avatar adapted instantly, each strike learning from the last, its combat algorithms refined through eons of slaughter. Raiden couldn't win. That was obvious within seconds. The avatar was functionally immortal, sustained by the blood god's infinite rage, capable of regenerating from any wound. But winning wasn't the objective. Hurting was. Every cut Raiden landed sent feedback through the warp connection, tiny spikes of genuine pain transmitted to the consciousness beyond. Each wound forced the blood god to expend attention, power, focus on maintaining this fragment of himself. The fight lasted for an eternity compressed into moments. Raiden suffered injuries that would have killed any mortal warrior, his arms severed, his torso pierced, his systems failing. But his body was designed to keep fighting until nothing remained, and his will refused to acknowledge defeat. Finally, with a roar that shattered dimensions, the Avatar dismissed itself. Not because it was defeated, it could have fought forever, but because Khorne realized the truth. This warrior would never stop, never yield, never worship. Killing him was pointless. He would just keep fighting until his last component failed. And every second of the fight was a second the blood god wasn't focusing on other battles, other conquests, other souls to claim. Raiden collapsed in the brass arena, his body broken, his systems in cascading failure. But he was smiling a grim, satisfied expression. He had just made a god bleed. The warp ejected him violently, rejecting his presence like a body rejecting a toxin. He materialized in the material realm on some nameless asteroid, his wounds already beginning to regenerate through a combination of enhanced healing and emergency repair nanites. The word spread through the warp's depths. The anomaly had invaded a demon world and survived. He had challenged an avatar of the blood god and forced a stalemate. He had proven that the dark powers, for all their might, were not invincible. Raiden raided 3 more demon worlds over the following months. Each raid was surgical: identify high-value targets, eliminate them, escape before overwhelming force could respond. He wasn't trying to win the war. He was demonstrating that chaos could be wounded, that the gods could be forced to defend rather than eternally attack. Other warriors began to notice. Space Marine chapters spoke of the mortal who raided the Eye of Terror alone. Inquisitors debated whether he was the greatest hero in the Imperium or the most dangerous maverick. Chaos champions began to fear him not for his strength, but for what he represented.
The possibility of resistance.
The idea that gods could be fought without faith, that power could be challenged by skill, that conviction didn't require worship. Raiden didn't care about the philosophical implications. He simply knew that as long as he had a blade and a target, he would keep fighting. The gods had noticed him. Now they would learn to regret it. Years passed, or perhaps only months' time moved strangely for someone who had walked through the warp and returned unchanged. Raiden became a legend told in whispers, a myth that soldiers shared in trenches while waiting for dawn. The Imperium tried to claim him, to forge him into a symbol they could control. They offered him titles: Saint Militant, God Emperor's Blade, the Incorruptible. He refused them all. When the ecclesiarchy attempted to build a shrine in his honor, he destroyed it personally, leaving only a message carved in the rubble. "I'm not your saint, I'm just a soldier." The Mechanicus never stopped trying to capture and study him, sending recovery teams whenever reports placed him on a battlefield. He evaded them with the same efficiency he brought to every other fight, not through hostility, but through simply being elsewhere when they arrived. The Inquisition kept a file on him thicker than most heretical movements. Inquisitors debated endlessly whether he was miracle or mutation, asset or threat. The debate never reached conclusion because Raiden never stayed in one place long enough to be properly judged. He became a ghost that haunted the Imperium's darkest war zones. When a hive world's last regiment faced annihilation by tyrannid swarms, a silver blade appeared and carved through synapse creatures until the hive mind withdrew in confusion. When a chaos incursion threatened to overwhelm a forge world's defenses, the demon princes leading the assault were found dead in their command throne, executed with precision that left their armies leaderless. When orc wahags threatened to overwhelm entire sectors, the war bosses mysteriously died in their sleep. If sleep could describe what orcs did, their heads removed with cuts so clean the bodies stood upright for minutes before falling. Raiden never announced his arrival. He never sought recognition or reward. He simply appeared where the fighting was worst, did what needed to be done, and vanished before anyone could properly thank or condemn him. Soldiers who fought beside him, guardsmen, space marines, Even the occasional desperate cultist turned rebel all reported the same thing. He fought with a calmness that bordered on meditation, as if war was simply a state of being he had accepted completely. He never showed anger, never displayed the righteous fury the Imperium considered holy. He was violence rendered into art, death sculpted into efficiency.
Some called him a curse. Some called him salvation.
Most who encountered him simply called him the Blade, because that was what he was, a weapon that had chosen its own targets, a sword that pointed itself. The Chaos gods never stopped hunting him, but they learned to be more cautious. Demon princes approached him with wariness rather than arrogance. Chaos champions hesitated when reports suggested he was on a battlefield, because everyone knew the Blade did not lose. He might retreat, might withdraw, might decide a fight wasn't worth his time, but he did not lose. On a world whose name had been expunged from records, Raiden sat on the ruins of a once great cathedral. The battle was over. Chaos had been pushed back, the civilians evacuated, the immediate crisis resolved. The sun was setting. This world still had a sun, still had days and nights, still pretended to normalcy despite the horrors that pressed against its borders. A young guardswoman approached him, her uniform still smoking from lost fire. She couldn't have been older than 20, her face a mixture of awe and terror. Are you really him, the Blade?" Raiden didn't look at her, just watched the sunset.
"I'm just a soldier who couldn't stop fighting.
They say you've killed demon princes, that you've walked through the warp, that you can't be corrupted or killed." "I can be killed," Raiden said quietly. "Everyone can. I've just been lucky. Then why do you keep fighting? Why not rest? Let someone else take the next battle." Raiden was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of something ancient and tired. "Because someone has to. Because in every war there are people like you soldiers who didn't choose this. Civilians who just want to survive. Lives that matter even if your empire forgets their names." He stood, his blade catching the dying light. "I couldn't save my world. Maybe I can save pieces of this one." The guardswoman watched him walk away, disappearing into the shadows between ruined buildings. Later, she would tell the story to her squad, and they would tell others, and the legend would grow distorted, embellished, but carrying a kernel of truth.
Somewhere in the galaxy, a war was beginning.
Somewhere, people were dying who didn't need to die, if only someone skilled enough, fast enough, committed enough would intervene. Raiden felt the pull, not destiny, not divine calling, just the simple knowledge that he was needed. He tightened his grip on his blade and moved toward the next battlefield, toward the next fight he hadn't chosen but would finish anyway. In a universe where war was prayer and slaughter was worship, he remained what he had always been, a warrior who fought without faith, killed without ceremony, and saved lives without asking permission. The blade that chose its own war.
And the war would never end.